An empty bike, a missing son. For Pam and Craig Akers, life in their small Missouri town changed in an instant. One moment, they were parents worrying about homework and dinner. The next, they were living every parent's worst nightmare. As days turned into weeks, the search grew desperate, hundreds of volunteers, helicopters, search dogs combing the woods. But hope was the only thing they found. For 4 long years, Shawn's parents refused to believe he was gone forever. What they didn't know was that their son was closer than anyone could imagine. The lime green bicycle lay twisted on its side in the gravel. On October 6, 2002, 11-year-old Shawn Hornbeck was riding his bike to a friend's house near Richwood when he was knocked off his bike by a van. The van's driver rushed out, seeming to want to help him at first, then grabbed him and brought him into the van. But this wouldn't be discovered until much later. For now, all anyone knew was that a boy had vanished. When Shawn didn't return home by evening, his parents called everyone they could think of. Friends, neighbors, relatives. No one had seen him. Hours after Shawn disappeared, sheriff's deputies, police and volunteers were combing the rough terrain around his hometown of Richwoods, Missouri. But aside from dogs detecting Shawn's scent, nothing else turned up, not even his bike. The search began immediately. Washington County had never seen anything like it. Hundreds of volunteers, search dogs, helicopters scanning the dense Missouri woods. People posted flyers with Shawn's picture all over town, and his parents, Pam and Craig Akers, appeared on television, pleading for their son's safe return. Every parent in the community felt their worst nightmare taking shape. Pam Akers had been a typical small-town mother the day before. She worked, she worried about normal things, homework, chores, what to cook for dinner. Now she found herself thrust into a world she never imagined existed. Television cameras, police interviews, search coordinators asking questions she couldn't answer. Where would Shawn go? Did he know anyone with a vehicle? Had there been any strangers in the area? The questions haunted her because the answers were so ordinary. Shawn wouldn't go anywhere without permission. He didn't know anyone with reason to hurt him. And strangers? In Richwoods, everyone noticed strangers. Craig Akers, Shawn's stepfather, had raised the boy since he was small. Craig Akers refused to give up his quest to find his kidnapped son, Shawn Hornbeck, during the 4 years and 3 months he was missing, even if it meant ignoring his own health. He organized search parties, coordinated with law enforcement, and refused to accept what some were beginning to whisper, that maybe Shawn was never coming home. As days turned into weeks, the massive search efforts began to wind down. The media moved on to other stories. But the Akers family couldn't move on. The rescue team was founded by Pam and Craig Akers following the disappearance of their son. Hornbeck's parents, Pam and Craig Akers of Richwoods, Missouri, started the foundation in January 2003 to help prevent child abduction and help search for lost or missing children. The foundation became their lifeline and their mission. Both Shawn's mother and stepfather spent all of their money and retirement savings looking for Shawn and paying investigators to help aid the police. Every lead, no matter how remote, was pursued. Every tip, no matter how unlikely, was investigated. Hope became both their salvation and their torment. Meanwhile, 60 miles away in suburban Kirkwood, Missouri, a man named Michael Devlin was settling into a routine with his captive. As a child, Devlin was adopted into a large family, where he had 3 brothers, also adopted, and 2 sisters. His co-workers at Imo's Pizza knew him as a quiet, reliable manager. His neighbors saw him as unremarkable, someone who kept to himself but caused no trouble. None of them knew that behind the door of his apartment, he was holding an 11-year-old boy who had been reported missing across the state. For over 4 years, Shawn was held captive in Devlin's apartment in Kirkwood, Missouri. The psychological manipulation began immediately. Devlin convinced Shawn that his parents had stopped looking for him, that no one cared if he ever came home, that resistance would only bring pain. Back in Richwoods, the seasons changed, but the searching never stopped. The Shawn Hornbeck Foundation grew, helping other families navigate the nightmare of a missing child. Pam Akers became an expert on search techniques, legal procedures, and media relations, knowledge no mother should ever need to acquire. The first anniversary of Shawn's disappearance came and went. Then the second. Then the third. With each passing year, the statistical probability of finding Shawn alive decreased dramatically. Law enforcement professionals knew the numbers. After the first few hours, then days, then weeks, the chances of recovery dropped precipitously. But Pam Akers refused to accept statistics. She had a mother's instinct, and that instinct told her Shawn was still alive somewhere. She couldn't explain it, couldn't prove it, but she knew it with a certainty that defied logic. Her son was out there, and she would never stop looking for him. Craig Akers supported his wife's unwavering faith, even as the search consumed their savings, their energy, and their health. After Shawn's abduction, the Akers established the Shawn Hornbeck Foundation to help others in their situation. The foundation has continued to grow since Shawn was returned to them and is taking up increasing amounts of their time. What they didn't know was that their foundation would indeed help bring their son home, just not in the way they expected. By 2006, 4 years had passed since that October afternoon when a lime green bicycle disappeared from a rural Missouri road. The case had gone cold. Most people assumed the worst. The Akers family had been through the stages of grief multiple times, cycling between hope and despair, determination and exhaustion. But 60 miles away, in an ordinary apartment complex in Kirkwood, Missouri, Shawn Hornbeck was still alive. He was now 15 years old, having spent 4 of the most formative years of his life in captivity. The 11-year-old boy who had vanished was gone forever, replaced by a teenager who had learned to survive in circumstances no child should ever face. Michael Devlin had created a world where he held absolute power over another human being. He had convinced Shawn that escape was impossible, that the outside world had forgotten him, that his only choice was compliance. It was a masterclass in psychological control, executed by a man his co-workers would describe as unremarkable. The year 2007 would bring changes that no one could anticipate. Michael Devlin, having successfully hidden one kidnapped child for over 4 years, was about to make a decision that would expose his crimes and bring both boys home. But first, another family would have to experience the same nightmare that had consumed the Akers for more than 4 years. The stage was set for what would become known as the Missouri Miracle. 2 families, 2 kidnapped boys, and 1 witness who would change everything. But none of them knew what was coming as 2007 began with Shawn Hornbeck still missing and his parents still searching, for years and 3 months after that terrible October day when trust was shattered forever in Richwoods, Missouri. For 4 years and 3 months, Shawn Hornbeck lived a double existence. To the outside world, he had vanished without a trace. But they lived together in Kirkwood for 4 years using various cover stories, that they were father and son, or Devlin was a friend of the boy's father. The apartment at 441 South Holmes Street became both prison and sanctuary, a place where survival meant accepting an unthinkable reality. Imprisoned for 5 years by Michael Devlin, Shawn Hornbeck was sexually abused and threatened with death if he ever even tried to reach out to the authorities. The psychological control was absolute. Devlin had convinced Shawn that his parents had stopped searching, that no one cared if he lived or died, that any attempt to escape would result in his murder, and possibly the murder of his family back in Richwoods. Meanwhile, Michael Devlin maintained his carefully constructed normal life. The 41-year-old pizzeria manager in suburban St. Louis may have had a short temper, but otherwise, he betrayed few clues about a possible secret life as a kidnapper. Every morning, he drove to work at Imo's Pizza, where his co-workers knew him as a reliable, if sometimes difficult, manager. He handled deliveries, managed staff, and dealt with customers, all while holding a kidnapped child in his apartment. His neighbors in the Kirkwood apartment complex saw nothing suspicious. Harry Richard, 33, was a neighbor of Devlin and also a big fan of the horrorcore music of Insane Clown Posse. Richard, who often wears Posse t-shirts, says he would frequently hear the band's music blasted during the day from the apartment below, when Devlin would be at work at the pizza shop. The loud music provided cover for whatever was happening inside apartment 441. The most chilling aspect of this captivity was how ordinary it appeared. Devlin and Shawn were seen together regularly. They went to stores, visited restaurants, walked through the neighborhood. Later, a list of the many missed opportunities by local authorities and residents emerged. This point seemed to still upset the FBI agents. How many people saw them together and never questioned the relationship? How many chances were there to save Shawn that simply passed unnoticed? Back in Richwoods, the community had been forever changed by Shawn's disappearance. Parents no longer let their children ride bikes alone. Doors that had never been locked now had multiple security systems. The innocence that had defined this small rural community was gone, replaced by a wariness that colored every interaction with strangers. The Shawn Hornbeck Foundation had grown from a desperate parent's last resort into a legitimate organization helping families across the country. Pam and Craig Akers had become reluctant experts in missing children cases, offering guidance and support to other families experiencing their worst nightmare. But every success story for another family was a reminder that their own son was still missing. In January 2007, Michael Devlin made a decision that would ultimately lead to his downfall. He decided to kidnap another child. Ben, 13, was gone 4 days from his home in rural Beaufort, Missouri. In 2007, Ben Ownby was kidnapped. He was rescued after 15-year-old Mitchell Holtz gave officials key information about a truck used to kidnap his neighbor. January 8, 2007. A Monday afternoon in Franklin County, Missouri. 13-year-old Ben Ownby stepped off his school bus at his regular stop near his home in Beaufort. He was walking toward his house when a white pickup truck approached. The driver offered him a ride. When Ben refused and continued walking, the man got out of the truck and forced the boy inside. Mitchell Holtz is a young man of few words. But when it mattered most, he talked late into the night, giving authorities the information they needed to rescue his friend and another boy held captive. Mitchell had been waiting for his own school bus when he witnessed Ben's abduction. As a truck enthusiast, he was able to provide investigators with crucial details about the vehicle, make, model, color, and partial license plate information. The description Mitchell provided was specific enough to narrow the search significantly. Law enforcement agencies across Missouri began looking for a white pickup truck matching his description. Within days, the search had focused on the St. Louis metropolitan area, where several vehicles fitting the description had been registered. What neither Ben Ownby nor his family knew was that his kidnapping was about to solve another family's 4-year nightmare. FBI and police from across Missouri started searching 4 days earlier for Ben Ownby, who was kidnapped from his rural bus stop in Franklin County, Missouri. If it wasn't for Mitchell Holtz, a teenage boy who witnessed the kidnapping, the Missouri miracle probably wouldn't have come true. Back at the apartment in Kirkwood, Shawn Hornbeck was experiencing a different kind of terror. For over 4 years, he had been Devlin's only victim. Now there was another boy, younger and more frightened than Shawn remembered being. The dynamic in the apartment changed dramatically. Devlin was more aggressive, more paranoid, and more controlling than ever. One boy, who authorities say was held for 4 years, apparently had access to phones and the internet, but made no attempt to escape. This detail would later puzzle investigators and the public alike. How could a kidnapped child have access to communication tools and not call for help? The answer lay in the sophisticated psychological manipulation Devlin had employed. Shawn believed that any contact with the outside world would result in his death, and possibly Ben's as well. The pizza shop where Devlin worked noticed nothing unusual about his behavior during those 4 days in January 2007. Devlin was picked up by FBI agents Friday morning from the Kirkwood IMOs. He arrived for work as usual, performed his duties as manager, and gave no indication that he was holding 2 kidnapped children in his apartment just miles away. Meanwhile, the investigation into Ben Ownby's disappearance was intensifying. The detailed description provided by Mitchell Holtz had allowed investigators to create a specific profile of the vehicle they were seeking. Computer databases were searched, registrations were cross-referenced, and a list of potential suspects began to emerge. One name on that list was Michael J. Devlin of Kirkwood, Missouri. His white pickup truck matched the description perfectly. His background check revealed no prior criminal history, but investigators decided to pay him a visit anyway. They had no idea they were about to stumble upon one of the most extraordinary rescues in Missouri law enforcement history. A description of the vehicle that was wanted in connection with Ben Ownby's kidnapping led police to an apartment complex in the 400 block of South Holmes Street in Kirkwood. On Friday morning, January 12, 2007, law enforcement officers approached Michael Devlin's apartment building. They were looking for a 13-year-old boy who had been missing for 4 days. They had no idea they were about to find 2 boys, and solve a case that had haunted Missouri for over 4 years. The apartment complex looked exactly like what it was, a quiet, middle-class residential building where working people lived unremarkable lives. Nothing about the exterior suggested that behind one of those doors, 2 kidnapped children were being held captive. Nothing indicated that they were moments away from discovering what would soon be called the Missouri Miracle. January 11, 2007. For days after Ben Ownby's kidnapping, law enforcement agencies across Missouri were following up on leads generated by Mitchell Holtz's detailed description of the white pickup truck. Computer searches had narrowed the list of potential suspects to a manageable number. One name that appeared on that list was Michael J. Devlin of Kirkwood, Missouri. The investigation had moved swiftly from a rural Franklin County bus stop to the suburbs of St. Louis. Detectives were methodically checking every vehicle registration that matched the witness description. When they cross-referenced Michael Devlin's address with his vehicle registration, they decided he warranted a visit. They had no reason to suspect this would be anything more than routine questioning. January 12, 2007. Friday morning. FBI agents and local law enforcement officers approached the apartment complex at 441 South Holmes Street in Kirkwood. They were looking for Ben Ownby, the 13-year-old boy who had been missing for 4 days. They had no idea they were about to discover something that would shock the nation. When authorities knocked on Michael Devlin's door, they expected to ask a few questions about his truck and his whereabouts on January 8. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented in Missouri law enforcement history. Inside the apartment were 2 boys, not just Ben Ownby, but another child who would soon be identified as Shawn Hornbeck, missing for over 4 years. The moment of recognition was electric. Ben Ownby was easily identifiable from recent photographs. But the older boy presented a puzzle until someone made the connection. Could this 15-year-old possibly be the 11-year-old who had disappeared from Rich Woods in October 2002? The math was right, Shawn would be 15 by now. But after 4 years and 3 months, could it really be him? Michael Devlin was arrested immediately. The man who had successfully hidden his crimes for over 4 years, who had convinced his co-workers and neighbors that he was nothing more than a quiet pizza manager, found his carefully constructed double life collapsing in minutes. The apartment that had been his kingdom of control became his downfall. For Shawn Hornbeck, the rescue represented something more complex than simple relief. After 4 years of captivity, the outside world had become foreign to him. He had adapted to survive in circumstances that most people couldn't imagine. The psychological manipulation had been so complete that freedom itself felt dangerous and uncertain. The phone calls that followed would become part of Missouri folklore. Pam Akers received the call she had been waiting for, hoping for, praying for 4 years, 3 months, and 6 days. Her son was alive. He was safe. He was coming home. The foundation she had built, the searches she had organized, the hope she had maintained against all statistical probability, it had all been validated in one miraculous moment. Craig Akers later described the phone call as surreal. After spending years expecting the worst news imaginable, receiving the best news possible seemed almost too good to be true. They had to see Shawn with their own eyes before they could truly believe the nightmare was over. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. News crews descended on both Kirkwood and Richwoods. The story of the Missouri Miracle captured national attention: 2 kidnapped boys found alive, one after just 4 days, the other after more than 4 years. It was the kind of story that restored faith in impossible outcomes. Ben Ownby's rescue after 4 days was remarkable in itself. But Shawn Hornbeck's rescue after 4 years and 3 months defied every statistic about long-term missing children. The combination of both rescues happening simultaneously created a story that seemed almost too extraordinary to be true. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Michael Devlin faced charges in multiple jurisdictions for crimes spanning 5 years. The evidence against him was overwhelming: 2 rescued victims, physical evidence from his apartment, and a trail of documentation that established his guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Circuit Court Judge Stanley Williams sentenced Devlin to life for kidnapping and 20 years for armed criminal action. But the state charges were only the beginning. Federal prosecutors also filed charges related to the interstate nature of the crimes and the production of child pornography. He is serving 74 life sentences plus 2,020 years at Crossroads Correctional Center in Cameron, Missouri. Michael Devlin, a former pizzeria manager in Missouri, is already serving multiple life terms for kidnapping and assaulting Shawn Hornbeck and Ben Ownby. The federal charges added another 74 life sentences and 170 years for federal charges to his punishment. The sentencing ensured that Michael Devlin would never again have the opportunity to harm a child. His total sentence is 4,240 years. For the families of his victims, this represented not just justice, but closure. The man who had stolen years from their sons would spend the rest of his life in prison. But the story of the Missouri Miracle extends far beyond the rescue and conviction. The Shawn Hornbeck Foundation, created during the darkest days of the search, continued its mission with renewed purpose. What had begun as one family's desperate attempt to find their missing son had evolved into a resource for families across the country facing similar nightmares. The Foundation's work expanded significantly after Shawn's rescue. With their son safely home, Pam and Craig Akers could now focus entirely on helping other families. They had walked through the valley of every parent's worst nightmare and emerged with knowledge that could help others navigate the same terrible journey. For both families, rebuilding their lives meant learning to live with trauma while celebrating survival. Shawn had to readjust to a world that had moved on without him for over 4 years. Friends had graduated from middle school and started high school. Technology had advanced. Family dynamics had changed. Everyone had aged except him in their memories. Ben Ownby, despite his shorter captivity, also faced challenges in returning to normal life. 4 days might seem brief compared to 4 years, but for a 13-year-old, those 4 days contained experiences that would require years of processing and healing. The community of Richwoods, which had been forever changed by Shawn's disappearance, now had to adjust to his return. The heightened security measures, the constant wariness, the loss of innocence, these changes couldn't simply be reversed by good news. The community had learned that terrible things could happen anywhere, even in the safest seeming places. Yet there was also healing. Children could ride their bikes again without parents calling police. Neighbors could trust neighbors again. The foundation of community fear that had been laid in October 2002 was finally replaced by something stronger, the knowledge that even in the darkest circumstances, miracles are possible. 20 years later, the Missouri miracle continues to resonate. It represents the power of never giving up hope, the importance of community support, and the extraordinary impact one witness can have. Mitchell Holt's decision to pay attention, to remember details, to speak to authorities, that decision saved 2 lives and brought closure to families that had been living in limbo. The story reminds us that behind every missing child poster is a family that refuses to give up, a community that continues to search, and the possibility that somewhere, somehow, a miracle is waiting to unfold. In Missouri, that miracle has a name, a date, and 2 boys who came home when everyone else had given up hope. The Missouri miracle proved that sometimes, the impossible becomes possible, and love really can conquer all.